Do you want to learn the fastest way to get your kids to trust that you have the answers? If you do, then stick around because here on Built Not Hacked, we're answering that question now. Have you ever noticed how many parents try to protect their kids from seeing them struggle? They don't want their children to see them frustrated, they don't want to see them make mistakes, and they definitely don't want to see them be incompetent. That feeling is understandable. I get it. And as a parent, you want your kids to feel safe and secure. You want them to believe that everything is under control. But over the years, I've come to believe something different. Sometimes the most valuable thing your children can see is you working through something that isn't easy. Not because struggle is pleasant, but because struggle is where the real lessons live. When my kids were younger, I didn't consciously think about whether I was shielding them from difficulty or letting them see it. I was just living the life the best way I knew how, and I'm sure you are too. Looking back now, I'm actually glad they saw some of the moments of me struggling. They saw projects that didn't work the first time. They saw problems that took a long time to figure out. They saw me slow down, think things through, and try again. And what's interesting is now that my children are adults, they come to me with questions about their own work, their businesses, their relationships. Not because I had all the answers when they were growing up, but because they watched how I handled situations when the answers weren't obvious. That's the part that people often overlook. And that's the reason why dads find so many teachable moments when their kids help them with mechanical things like fixing the car or a lawnmower. So here's a scenario. The grass is tall and it needs to be cut for the first time this year. You take out the lawnmower from the garage and you pull the string, and guess what? It doesn't start. So here's where the learning starts. Because the first thing that's going to happen is that sweet, wonderful child is going to come running over, and the first thing out of his mouth is going to be, "Dad, I can't get the mower started." To which I reply, "Did you try to get it started?" And of course the answer is always going to be, "Yeah, I pulled the string." Thing's been sitting in the garage all winter long, and of course it's not going to start on the first pull. So the short story is, after replacing the stabilizer with fresh fuel and checking and replacing a cracked fuel hose, we got it running. And the point of this is to say that we struggled to get it running because we diagnosed something, ran to the store, diagnosed something, ran to the store. And what he witnessed was that sometimes problems don't fix themselves and you got to dig deeper to get to the answers. And kids notice how you consider your options. They see how you pause before answering a difficult question. They understand whether you react emotionally or thoughtfully during disagreements. One thing I've always believed strongly is that words matter. I used to tell my kids all the time, words have meaning. You can apologize later if you want, but once those words leave your mouth and enter someone's ears, it's hard to take back. So even when their mother and I disagreed, we never resorted to name calling or raising our voices just to win an argument. And the interesting thing is that now I see the same traits in my sons. When they respond to their spouses or talk through problems, I can see the poise and thoughtfulness they practiced growing up. Not because they were told to do it, but because they watched it happen over and over again. That's how character transforms from one generation to the next. Not through speeches, but through repetition. Another thing I learned is the struggle itself carries a lesson children need to see. There's an old idea that a person who builds something from the ground up earns a certain kind of respect, while someone who simply inherits it doesn't fully understand what it took to create it. That's not an insult to the person who inherited it. It's just in recognition that the builder experienced every obstacle along the way. They felt the friction, made adjustments, and laid the bricks one at a time. If children only see the finished structure, they assume success appeared fully formed. But if they see the bricks being laid, they understand how things are actually built. And that's important, because struggle isn't a signal to stop. Struggle is just information. When one of my kids comes to me frustrated about something, the first thing I try to figure out is not how to fix the problem. The first thing I want to understand is where the skill gap is. Where does their current knowledge stop, and where does learning something new begin? Once you find that boundary, the problem becomes teachable. Struggle doesn't mean you're failing. It usually means you're reaching the edge of what you know, and you're about to learn something new. I had a mentor once who taught me something similar in a working environment. He told me no one is responsible for feeding you information. If you want to become a valuable person in the room full of people, you have to go find the answers yourself. And that idea stuck with me. Because the fastest way to build a skill is through self-education. You read more, you study more, you try things, you adjust them, and you try again. Struggling is just the friction that starts the fire, and persistence is what fans the flames. The problem is that a lot of people hope for big outcomes with very small efforts. They want the results without staying in the process long enough to see it through. But progress rarely works that way. Tiny efforts compound over time, but only if you stick with them long enough for the results to appear. That's another reason it's important for children to see their parents working through difficult situations, because what they're really learning isn't how to avoid struggle. They're learning how to engage with it. They're learning that problems can be approached calmly. They're learning that frustration doesn't mean failure. And they're learning that persistence eventually turns small efforts into meaningful progress. And as a parent, you don't have to be perfect every day. But if your child consistently sees you approaching life with patience, thoughtfulness, and persistence, those behaviors eventually become part of how they operate too. That's how standards are passed down. Not by telling your kids what kind of person to be, but by showing them how to live. If this gave you something to think about, stick with me. On this channel, we talk about how life actually works so you can make better decisions, build better habits, and become someone the people around you can rely on. Here on Built Not Hacked, we discuss all kinds of everyday situations that affect our daily lives. And if this has helped you think differently about how to not shield your children from the struggles in your life, but to make it a learning experience for your family, then consider hitting the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.